Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's EA View on the archetype of Cancer. My name's Chahal. I'm joined today by the wonderful Deva Green. Hey, Deva.
Hello.
We have Sue Hillyard who's joining us again. Hey, Sue.
Hi. Good to be here.
And we've got, yeah, good to have you again, Sue. And the amazing Jordyn Smith. Hey, Jordyn.
Hey, Rob.
Hi. Right. So, Cancer, we've named this one the ocean of our emotional security. And that's because Cancer, the fourth house, and the moon archetype is all about our emotional security. The ultimate lesson in the archetype of Cancer is to learn that nothing outside of ourselves can give us the security that we seek. It's only by going within and seeing that security is actually an inner job. It's not based on our parents. It's got nothing to do with our family, our job, career, partner, etc. Um, that's why Cancer as an archetype relates to our emotional structure. It's our egocentric identity that we've been born with into this incarnation. And without the ego, we can't experience life. We can't experience this human journey. So the soul creates that egocentric image in order to know itself, and the ultimate lesson, the experience of the soul is to evolve. And it's through the Cancer archetype that we evolve, through our emotional body. We're all souls experiencing this incarnation, and that's why there's a natural trine between Cancer and the eighth house, which is naturally Pluto Scorpio archetype. Therefore, the fourth house Cancer moon archetype can show us the kind of childhood environment we're born into, the nurturing we all experience during our early years, and the emotional nature that we end up creating in our lives. Therefore, understanding your own fourth house archetype, where the sign of Cancer is placed in your natal birth chart, and even your moon sign by house sign and aspects, can give you more of an understanding of your own core emotional structure and how you relate to life emotionally. The moon is a very important sign in astrology generally because we live life emotionally. We are emotional beings, and we live from moment to moment basis, and that's fully embodies the moon Cancer fourth house archetype. And ladies, I was thinking about this earlier. We all have different moon signs. People talk about star signs, sun signs, and that is our personality, but we respond to life emotionally. I'm personally my moon signs in the archetype of Capricorn in the fifth house. And I remember when I was younger, some people would say to me, you can come across a little bit cold. And I'd be like, but I'm not a cold person. I'm quite fun loving, I'm creative. And that's how I know myself, my natural fifth house moon placement. And I was thinking about the fourth house placement today as well. Whatever sign conditions that house is how we also emotionally relate to our lives. And yeah, just looking at that whole aspect, how would you look at the whole fourth house Cancer moon archetype? Anything else to add?
Yeah, from my understanding, it's also how we nurture ourselves when we transition from what we drew emotional security from in the past to that process of progressively internalizing emotional security, the heart of the fourth house. So we may find that we're in situations where either by having external sources of emotional security pulled with or without our cooperation or desire for it
Mm.
to be, that we find, speaking from a second house place, our own resources or our own ability to almost compensate or to revamp that security from coming from external to internal. And that will be specific to the moon sign. So let's say, for example, in a general sense, if you have a moon in the fifth, being creative, perhaps self-expression or ways to nurture ways of self-actualizing that feel quite playful. Fifth house,
Yeah.
tune into that creative spirit, can be ways to navigate that transition from past to future. And when we're vulnerable, to work through those emotional channels.
Yeah. Well, you've just reminded me, Dave, that when I was younger, I thought I was going to become an actress. Yeah, I used, I loved
Yeah.
movies. I still do love movies.
Yeah.
And I remember just growing up thinking, I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I want to do. I just want to have fun.
Oh,
And yeah, and if I'm honest, coming into even astrology, I'm having fun. Just being here, expressing, talking, interacting, doing something that feels deeply, deeply emotional for me. And that's where the moon archetype can come in. And I know that Sue, just gonna you're a Gemini moon, right? Am I correct?
That's correct.
Yes. How
In
have
the
you found
11th
your
house.
in the 11th? So you got the Aquarius energy linked in there.
Yeah, and I love
How would you
chit-chatting with my friends.
There you go, Gemini, and your friends, of course. And Jordyn, your moon sign's gone straight out of my head.
I have a Libra moon in the 6th house. So growing up, I always befriended the people in school who no one wanted to play with, no one cared about. And I always looked at people as equals. I couldn't wrap my head around like why people were mean to other people. It made me like have like such a tender little spot in my heart. And growing up, I always said I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just wanted to help people. So I think that kind of speaks to the 6th house archetype. And also the Libra is like looking at people through the eyes of equality at all cost. So.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I can vouch for that. You definitely are a helper. Right. And just moving on then, we have a full moon coming up on Sunday. Well, I say Sunday here on the 3rd of July. No, let me get the day right. That will be Monday. Today is the 1st. Yeah, and Jordyn's going to start us off just going through this particular transit.
Yes, thank you, Roth. So with this full moon, so after this full moon, I just want to touch a little bit on the new moon that's going to come up on the 17th, because this is really powerful. The new moon is going, after it happens, the nodes are going to shift. And so I just want everyone to keep that in mind as we talk about this full moon, because there's a lot of culmination that's wanting to come into fruition. And there's also some stuff within this chart that speaks to that new moon, new phases wanting to arise, through this kind of culmination process, the next few weeks. So this full moon is happening in the sign of Capricorn. And we also have Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. So both of these are ruled by the Saturn in Pisces, which is retrograde. And whenever I am looking at this full moon, this is really about wrapping up a lot of dynamics that have been long standing in order for us to create a new structure from within. And there's a learning process that's wanting to come about. And we can see that with Mercury in a new phase conjunction to the sun happening in the sign of Cancer, which is ruled by this moon in Capricorn. And so this is really about being one's own authority in order to do this work. If you're wanting to change something that's going on in your life, and you are feeling the tension within and the emotional dynamics arising around this time, you're definitely going to be wanting to get curious, put in that Mercury, and get curious about what's arising within yourself. With Saturn retrograde along with Pluto retrograde, and Neptune, the ruler of that Saturn, we can be revisiting dynamics at this time in order to reflect upon them, which is also this Capricorn dynamic of, we can feel like during this full moon, we're taking 2 steps forward and we're needing to, and then taking 1 step back because we're needing to reflect. So there can be old cycles that are coming up in order for us to apply what we have been learning. And it's also going to be giving us a chance to not only revisit it, but to resolve something by utilizing the knowledge that we've been gaining through the prior months. Saturn in the sign of Pisces is really about dissolving man-made structures or laws that are in values that aren't in resonance. So for a lot of people, I have a sneaking suspicion they're going to be looking at their ideals, right? what's coming up within their relationships where maybe they're not being their own inner authority. They're not asking or answering their own questions because they've been conditioned to kind of, you know, seek advice or wisdom from someone else, when really this is a full moon. In order to culminate dynamics, you're wanting to use the wisdom that naturally comes through direct experience and reflecting on prior experiences. Saturn in Pisces is in a crescent phase sextile to Jupiter in Taurus. So this means that we're really wanting to rely on our intuition and our own authenticity and our values to really ground within that. You know, like, who are you? And understanding if you need to make a choice, seeing as Mercury's in this new phase conjunction to the sun, which is opposing this full moon, is to really ground within one's own understanding and one's own knowing in order to be that natural authority in your life. There's a yod going on between Pluto, Neptune, and Mars. And so this just kind of, I feel like there's so many repeating signatures here on being one's own mother and father in order to have to make the choices that one is needing to make, right? And the sign of Leo, I think that, Deva, you actually kind of touched on this earlier whenever we were talking about, you know, when we're younger, our identity, and then when we get older, how we kind of morph this. So in the sign of Leo, I'm pretty sure Jeffrey Wolf Green talked about, this is like a teaching of his, that in the sign, so we have our personality where we're identified with something, but then we get to give it color, like, you know, paint it and make it what we want it to be creative in how we want to express ourselves. And it has nothing to do with really, we're wanting to slough off like our conditioning. How are you going to be your own person and have your own identity? And so a lot of things revolving around not only being your own mother and father can arise, but also the need to color your life in the best way that you see fit, right? To take in that Leo archetype and really do that in order to have this kind of readjustment and realignment process that's wanting to happen as we're revisiting old dynamics that could be surfacing. This is especially going to be true for people who have something in the cardinal axis at 11 degrees, give or take. We also have Mars, Venus, balsamic to each other. Venus is she's in her pre-shadow period. So we're going to be working on these dynamics for quite some time. And this has to deal with this creative actualization of how do you in your life want to feel secure? What constitutes your inner security, and how can you creatively actualize through your own emotional dynamics? Like, what can you pull from the inside, from your emotional reality? What would having your own values look like as opposed to your conditioned values? Are they man-made? Are they natural? What's your natural truth, seeing as there's, you know, Jupiter's in this mix? And then also Jupiter is sextile the sun in a last quarter phase. So the key is to not borrow from old conditioning. It's about doing something brand new so that the culmination can happen. So it's really going after what your heart is desiring to do and really grounding within your own autonomy, your own inner voice, your own authenticity, and your own personal truth, as opposed to maybe what's been projected on you prior to this. And so a lot can be coming up relationally for people to understand what their dynamics are and where their conditioning lies and how it's affected them. And Lilith is trine Uranus in this equation, and Lilith is in the sign of Virgo, and trine Uranus in the sign of Taurus, which means that Mercury and Venus are, you know, even a part of that conversation as well. And this trine to me speaks to, as we make these decisions and we're conducting our own natural authority of whatever may be arising for each one of us on an individual level, that not only is the value in the effort, but this is something that can really help us to continue to transform our relationship to ourselves, as long as we don't get caught up in guilt and shame, and to remember that there's this natural inconjunct that happens between Virgo and Aries. And so it's about when we stay paralyzed within a fear or perfectionism, that the key for the readjustment to happen is to take a step, to create an action, because it's going to create a reaction. And from that reaction, we get to then to adjust as necessary. And through that adjustment from Lilith to Uranus, we get to liberate from those dynamics through just making an act, creating an action. And this helps us to really be able to create more objectivity and to listen to our inner voice as to what action we're needing to take. And so this is what I'm seeing with this full moon. And in order to kind of culminate these dynamics before this new moon occurs on the 17th, whenever the nodal axis shifts into Libra and Aries.
It's interesting. You mentioned how this is all to do with restructuring, you know, the way we've been in relationship to ourselves and others. If you notice as well, you've got Ceres, which is in Libra at 3 degrees. It's actually squaring. It's a T-square between the sun and the moon. So it again points back to exactly what you said about kind of, it's in a crisis aspect. So, you know, the question is, how are we nurturing ourselves? You know, are we nurturing ourselves the way we're nurturing our outer relationships? And it's what we've talked about in terms of what Cancer represents, which is your emotional body, your emotional journey. You know, are you being true to your own core emotional nature, or are you projecting it back out onto others, expecting them to meet that in a void?
You know that Ceres is actually in a yod with Saturn and the North Node as well.
Yeah.
So you're really touching on that. The key is to really not abandon oneself, to come back into balance. And that helps the structure. So it's really applying values that are in alignment and truth with ourselves, and then putting that to the test of life, like walking your talk, right?
Yeah. And it's that full moon, you know, where we're always throwing off something. And here, like you said, the old dynamics, the old structures, what doesn't work. Saturn in Pisces retrograde, I really feel like it's making us try to remember you're a spiritual being having a human experience, not the other way around. I really sense that. And it's like if you were trying to improve ourselves from the inside out, you know, if your outer reality isn't working to what you want, look at the inner reality, change that inner reality first, and the outer will project the inner.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as you just mentioned, that new moon coming up on the 17th, and then we're going to have Venus go retrograde. I know you're going to touch upon it now. This is like accumulate what needs to be accumulated now before those energies come forward, because then they'll just get a bit stronger.
Yeah, this actually, to me, I feel like, especially with Venus going retrograde, and there's so many planets, like, you know, that are going to be retrograde, and then the nodal axis is shifting, and so the North Node ruler is now going to be the South Node ruler. And I feel like with this full moon, this is like, it's helping to lay out a foundation for what's about to occur. You know, everything that we've been working on, especially the past 18 months of our inner relationship with ourselves, now we're getting a chance to apply that to our relational dynamics. And so it's like putting our feet to the fire. Like, how are you going to walk your talk? Also, with, you know, Lilith still in the sign of Virgo, and later on she is going to go into Libra. This is about doing this work right now of taking the necessary steps to learn and to grow and to have discernment, and then we get to apply it to have a more holistic approach to come back into balance. So we're all kind of in this time period of wanting to return to our center and wanting to come back into balance. And I'm definitely looking at this in a more like I'm being objective, but I'm utilizing this for each person who's kind of obviously, when you're reading a full moon, there's a generalization, but if you're looking at this in a more transpersonal way, this is really looking at, as a whole, we're wanting to go back to giving, sharing, and inclusion on a societal basis. We're wanting to look at more matriarchal type of things. We're wanting to slough off the patriarchal dynamics. We're wanting to like come back into balance by inducting the undistorted masculine and feminine, and even Lilith going into the sign of Libra later on this year as this nodal axis switches, and Lilith is going to go over that south node. So there's all of this kind of juicy content that is for the collective, that's saying as a whole, let's get our values in check so that way we can structure. Let's go back to more timeless and universal natural principles as opposed to these man-made structures that are creating massive amounts of stress and imbalances within the collective. And so that's kind of, you know, these double takes of what's more of a psychological viewpoint and what's more of a transpersonal overall viewpoint.
Yeah, no, that was really, really well described, Jordyn. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
But yes, you know, this month, though, I was looking at the transits, I'm like, not really a lot going on, but there is a lot going on, you know, with those major transits. So yeah. So just moving on now from the Capricorn full moon.
Before we move on, I think this would be a good time to mention that Deva has written a book about the moon. And I know that Michelle Dench did an interview. Oh, there we go. There,
I'm like, shameless plug for you, Deva.
She's so, you're so quiet, Deva. You know that this kind of gets put into the background. But I know Michelle Dench did an interview with you about the book. Do you want to say a few words about it, or
Well, it's mainly just from what I've asked most from here today in terms of the moon and what you were talking about. From my vantage point too, it's also about seeing looking at the transits, navigating emotional insecurities when the external structure is in this case, seeing this moon in Capricorn and seeing the sun in Cancer opposition, throwing something off, and seeing the North Node in Taurus, perhaps being mindful of when we're feeling triggered by external expectations from others, and then we project the internal pressure as something outside ourselves. And part of what these transits will do too is induce an inner reflection, seeing the Saturn in Pisces that will help a culmination in terms of how we navigate the transition from past to future, instead of either, gosh, it could be so many ways, but oh my gosh, now I got to leave my job, or oh my gosh, now I got to leave the relationship, or, you know, I got to burn the bridge. This can become a way for us to work with times where we're feeling pressured to do things that might not feel natural for us, and re-engage, being able to either cultivate new resources or actualize ourselves in a way that reflects values that are emerging through the dynamic of projection, seeing that moon sun, if that makes sense. So in my view, this is almost like a way to navigate a discretion or discernment around what's this internal pressure that I'm feeling, and where is it coming from? Is it coming from the outside, or is it actually coming from me? And if it is, what resources do I have to navigate that emotional insecurity? So in terms of the book to the moon, or the moon, it's really dovetailing in the sense of how we navigate those emotional stresses on a day-to-day basis, and what we do to shift that pattern from being, again, externally focused or at times projected. Let's say, for example, an external person, or there was an external factor that was really seeing the South Node in Scorpio had my back, or, you know, they would always come to my defense, or so on, and suddenly we lose that. And we have to kind of stick up for ourselves in certain ways, or we have to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm just not, I'm feeling the pressure, but, and I'm feeling the pressure to meet your expectation, but I have to say, it's really not meeting my values, or it's really not meeting what I feel I'm needing emotionally speaking at this time. and going from there, or really being able to, on a day-to-day basis, nurture those stresses, or it's almost like a way of rebuilding emotional security that's coming from the inside out versus the outside in, which I hear you guys really talking about as a theme. And seeing these transits, I see that they're kind of can be hot button in terms of, again, projection, that it's all coming from outside. And that very well can be, but really managing the internal pressures, if that makes sense, and the internal responses.
I feel like too, Deva, you know, with Pluto in the sign of Capricorn and Uranus, they're pretty much in, you know, in a trine. There can be a lot of, if I feel like with Capricorn, there's like where we felt oppressed, where we've suppressed, or where there's repression. And with a full moon, we know that like emotional dynamics can just surface, right? Things can get external events can trigger this. And this is a full moon that can turn you back in on yourself as a way to figure out, how can I nurture? How can I validate? How can I still become vulnerable? How can I parent myself without externalizing or projecting this onto other people? And through that process, because there's this trine dynamic, and even the trine with Lilith to Uranus, there's a really good opportunity for us to liberate. And that's a part of this culmination process of, and then through that, with Uranus being ruled by a Venus and Leo, there's creative actualization that can happen on some type of way, like about in regards to being your own mom or dad, or what value or need was this linked with, that now I can recreate this and like be curious about this, you know, as a way to nurture oneself and really also stand in one's own self-dignity, right? It's Venus and Leo. So really wanting to love on oneself, to show oneself self-love.
But just going back to Sue, you mentioned Deva's book. For anybody just wanting to understand the moon archetype simply in all the different houses, signs, and the moon's nodes, it's a brilliant book, even for somebody who's not even versed in EA or even astrology. Deva, I actually recommended your book to a couple of my friends who don't know anything about astrology. And of course, they went straight to their own moon sign just to understand their own core emotional nature. And they both said to me, it rings so much, like it just rang true. And it's something they go back to, you know, if they're feeling a little bit emotionally off, or, you know, something just triggers them, they will look back to that chapter. And it's a book that's, you know, Jordyn's got it next to her table. Mine is literally just right next to me too. And it's a book that I think everybody should read, because we are, like I said throughout this presentation, we're emotional beings having a human experience, and understanding your co-emotional nature is very key to see how you respond to life and how life responds to you. So yeah,
I think people need to definitely, I think I even sent Deva an email about this after I got it, is the introduction that she does, just going over a foundation of what the moon is, because I feel like so often in astrology, there's not a good definition about that, or something that articulates it in a deep but simple, profound way. And I feel like in Deva's introduction, I've read it so many times just because I let it like just kind of absorb or osmose into me, like wash over me. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. So even if you're not wanting to look at, my point is even the stuff about the nodes and the moons, and David goes into even if you're what stage of evolution someone's in, but the introduction gives such a beautiful foundation. And it's like how the Pluto books are, is whenever you go back and you think that you got something, and then you go back and you read it, and then there's something new that you're like, oh my gosh. And that's literally just in her introduction. And so I wanted to speak on the introduction because I'm like, it was amazing to me.
Yay. So we'll put a link to where you can buy it in the description of the video. And thank you. Yes.
Hopefully we didn't embarrass you, Deva.
Oh no, I'm saying thank you very much.
Okay, you're just so meek. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm feeling what you're saying, and it's totally the metamorphosis or the rebuilding of the self-image, and how we'll feel that through the moon and the north node, north and south, and how we progress through that every day, or the day-to-day seeing the moon. So it's just all so much tying in with that.
yes.
Right, so moving on now, we are going to do our signature of the month, and it's a birthday girl. It's her birthday today. It's Pamela Anderson. And before we dive into her chart and to describe her soul journey in this incarnation, let me just give you a little bit of a background, and then we can apply the observation correlation technique that is very important in EA. So she's a Canadian-American actress, a model, a media personality, most famous for being a glamour model, posing for Playboy magazine, and playing the role of CJ Parker on the TV show Baywatch. She's also famous for the infamous sex tape with her former husband, Tommy Lee. She was born in Ladysmith, Canada, to working class parents. She has a younger brother who's also an actor and producer. Her parents, during her early childhood, her parents had a turbulent marriage with physical and verbal abuse taking place, but they stayed together throughout their marriage. She mentioned in an interview with Variety magazine and in her memoir, Love Pamela, that she had experienced sexual abuse on 3 separate occasions before she turned 18 years of age. One was her childhood babysitter. Second, it was when she was 12 years old, she was raped by a 25-year-old man. And thirdly, at high school, her boyfriend and his friends molested her. In 1988, after she had graduated high school, she decided to move to Vancouver to work as a fitness instructor. And in 1989, she attended a Canadian football game wearing a Labatt's t-shirt. And this is one of the first times she experienced fame because she was featured on the big screen from the crowd. And as a result, the brewing company Labatt's hired her as a spokesperson. So she ended up being a model for them for a short time. After that came the offer which would change her life from Playboy. She was featured as the Playmate for the month of February 1990. Then she would go on to make regular appearances for the magazine. And to date, I believe she holds the record for the most Playboy covers by any person. Then next came TV offers, and it was the TV series Baywatch that was an offer that came to her, which she actually turned down around 11 times. They had to keep going back to her because they actually created the role of CJ Parker based on Pamela Anderson. So she did eventually end up doing that for about 4 or 5 years. So she would go on to do a couple of other TV shows, and she would even try her hand at movies. But her movie Bob Wire didn't do very well, and she's never really gone back into films. She has competed in a variety of TV shows, like Dancing on Ice, Big Brother, not just in America, around the world. She's been to the UK to do those shows. She's been to France, to Bulgaria, Germany, and even India. She would go on to make her Broadway debut playing Roxy Hart in the production of Chicago in 2022. And she's also a very big activist promoting animal rights. She's posed for PETA on 2 very big occasions. One time she wore a white bikini with the slogan, "All animals have the same parts." And that was when her body was marked by the meat cuts that you can buy in a butcher's shop. And that particular advert was banned in Montreal on the grounds of sexism. And she also stripped for PETA for Valentine's Day, and the theme was "Vegans make better lovers." I love that. She's been a vegetarian since childhood. She became a vegan in her 20s for ethical reasons, and she promotes the benefits of having a plant-based diet. Right, I'm going to do a little bit separate description of her relationships, which she's also very famous for. So she's been married 6 times, and that's twice to Rick Solomon. She has 2 sons with her most famous relationship with Tommy Lee. The relationship with Tommy Lee was fraught with controversy, and of course, the infamous sex tape that was stolen from them and was released on the internet. They had married in 1995, but divorced in 1998 after Tommy Lee was arrested and convicted for spousal and child abuse. Pamela would then go on to marry a few more times, as I mentioned. And an interview with Variety magazine has said that through her life experiences with all the abuse and the relationship with her partners, she is dealing with the kind of aftermaths now in her life. She's processing the incidents. And she's actually quoted as saying, "I'm not a victim and I'm not a damsel in distress." And finally, there was a health condition that she experienced in March 2002. She contracted hepatitis C through sharing a needle with Tommy Lee. But she announced in 2015 that she was cured from that particular disease. But yeah, so that's just a little snippet of her life, if we can describe it, for the last 30 odd years. But looking at a chart, Deva's going to start us off with just her Pluto signature, showing her soul journey in this incarnation, and then we'll take it from there. Deva?
Yeah, are we all kind of in agreement that she's most likely in the first stages of individuated?
Yeah.
Just in the beginning processes of breaking out of the consensus?
Makes sense, yeah.
From my understanding, seeing that Pluto is in Virgo in the fourth house conjunct Uranus, then that it's a new phase in terms of where she draws her emotional security from, and patterns of either emotional denial or emotional negativity or a negative self-focus, which seeing the South Node then in Scorpio on the 6th, intensified situations of either having her own self-image mirrored back to her or brought to her awareness through either abuse, seeing Scorpio, or bringing up intense situations to where she could objectify what was going on an emotional level, seeing the emotional discernment of Pluto being in the fourth house and the new phase Uranus. So she could then bring it to completion, seeing the North Node in the 12th in Taurus, and seeing the polarity point then in Pisces in the 10th house, leading to linking her sense of self-worth or shifting or more from
just because it's just a bit, because you can't see on the screen, her nodes are actually 5th and 11th. It's just at the cusp. It just looks like it could be 6th, but it's the 5th
it's 5th
house.
and the 11th.
Yes, yeah, so 5th house is the South Node and North Node just at the cusp of the 11th. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So then that could be then liberation, or seeing that that Pluto Uranus, the liberation from those past conditions of abuse, and being able to emotionally mature in ways to where she could link her energies more towards universal, what was universally valued, or higher values, as a way of dissolving the past patterns that we were talking about, emotional, either emotional denial or having intense situations happen, so that she could objectify her own emotional reality was coming from the inside, and how that was then linked to the external experiences, seeing the 10th house. Advocacy for animals, advocacy for those who suffered abuse, and how that created a liberation in how she related to herself as well. Being able to self-empower and to perhaps nurture herself in ways that she hadn't, and to disconnect herself from external factors, seeing the South Node in Scorpio, that were perhaps feeding her self-image or feeding her need for emotional security. And it sounds to me like through the difficult situations, she really did a heck of a job jettisoning those things and being able to, when she needed to go it alone, and looking more within her own resources or her own bag of tricks. What do I have to get me through this? And that being its own kind of metamorphosis or rebirthing, and seeing the North Node being ruled by Venus in Leo, and is that in the third house, or that's in the fourth house then?
Fourth cusp, yeah, fourth house.
The fourth house, that connecting her to her own inner resources, or a way to empower herself with the key theme of being from the inside out. So in my view, I see a lifetime that really promoted or accelerated liberation, emphasizing taking a reflection on her own inner reality, and how that was then able to help her tune into her own resources and align herself with what she felt was most universally, or align herself with more universal values, and standing within that, or having that be a way to nurture herself instead of the external factors of the past, whether that be relationships, those who wielded a lot of power, seeing the South Node in Scorpio, and really going it alone, or doing this on her own devices in many ways.
Yeah, but then that Pluto in Virgo, Deva, it's that soul that would have to experience that growth through crises, that Virgo energy coming in. So that growth was going to happen through crises. And with the Pluto polarity point sitting in the 10th house in Pisces, it's that self-mastery and self-responsibility, and like surrendering to the experience that she'd gone through. And it's that quote that she said, "I'm not a victim," that really I feel fits with that Pluto polarity point in the 10th house.
Oh, absolutely. The reflection that comes, and being self-determined, or not making oneself a victim, rather growing from it. And reflecting on the emotional dynamics that would necessitate that through that crisis that you were speaking of. Why the crisis?
Yeah. Jordyn, what do you see in this lovely lady's chart?
Sorry, I'm sweating, ladies. Okay, so I'm gonna go over her Mercury and a T-square to her Mars and Moon. But also her Mars is conjunct Lilith, the asteroid, or what we call natural Lilith, and that's also conjunct her North Node of Chiron, which I find really interesting. So Mercury in the sign of Cancer in the second house. Well, this is a lifetime and it's retrograde, so she's revisiting different emotional dynamics to have experiences where she has been thrown back in on herself, as a way to learn about what exactly her own natural values are, as opposed to, especially this is a soul coming out of the consensus, more in the individuated. This just helps establish the individuated process for her to think for herself. And with this being in a square to Mars and Lilith and Chiron, this is someone who's wanting to create balance within herself. This is someone who's wanting to creatively actualize. You can also see with the opposition between Mars and her Moon forming this T-square, that in her life, after she experienced the overt sexualization of her, which was really not something that she liked. She said that she felt like a caricature. I can't say that word. Someone say it for me.
Now it's gone out my head. Caricature.
Can
you say it, David? A caricature. Okay. So she felt like people made fun of her and they only wanted to sign her up for certain roles. And so what she realized, and I see this oftentimes with a lot of people with Scorpio 6th houses. I'm not going to really get into a lot of the prior life dynamics because I don't know if that's really appropriate, but for her, there is something about her power is her beauty. And whenever she realized that people were making fun of her because of the imbalance that was created from the sex tape of people stealing it for her, she utilized her voice, and seeing as that Mars is and Lilith is ruled by that Venus and Leo, she utilized her own natural resources and her own values that she was learning about as a way to take charge of her own life by becoming an activist. You can see this with the moon also in that 11th house and in the sign of Aries being ruled by this Mars. That she was like, if people are going to make fun of me, then I'm gonna utilize it to have people write on me the cuts of the meat, or to, if you look at me like a piece of meat, then how about I put this out in a way that is really in alignment with my values of giving, sharing, and inclusion within within nature, essentially. You know, she's done a lot of environmentalist work. She's a powerhouse in her words. Even her sons have like spoken up about it, like maybe you should be quiet, and she's like, no. You can also see the relational dynamics of her speaking to her relationships, and we kind of talked about this, and David, you hit on this a little bit with her being thrown back in on herself as a way to resolve the types of power dynamics that she had in prior lifetimes. In this lifetime, she knew who she was, in the sense of, I love love, I love romance, but also I'm not going to take any crap. Like, I'm not, every time that she would, and Sue brought this up earlier, anytime that she would say to a man, I'm not here essentially because I need you, I'm here because I want to be, it struck a nerve, and it would create a situation of abuse to happen. And if you also look at her Mercury trining her Neptune, you can see where this has come into play, especially with her Chiron being at 29 degrees in the 10th house, ruled by that Neptune in the 6th, that there have been long-standing dynamics of people in authority that have, you know, created massive amounts of disillusionment that have affected her and created shame at prior times in this lifetime, and most definitely in prior lifetimes, seeing that this is retrograde. But that has really served the purpose for her to individuate and to utilize that as a way to empower herself, especially through her own self-expression. Leo is on her 3rd house cusp, and you know, it speaks to her Mercury and her 6th house. It also speaks to her Sun, which ultimately comes back to creative actualization through really being able to emotionally validate oneself. And this is a soul who's been working on that. I wanted to touch on, with Mars being conjunct natural Lilith in Libra, and also the North Node of her Chiron, so both being ruled by that Venus, we can see also when Chiron is in Pisces, oftentimes there can be a loss of innocence at a young age. And this speaks to her sexual assaults that she had. One of them was a man who was 25 who was playing backgammon with her while her friend was hanging out with his friend, and she was only 12, and he raped her. This also speaks to that Neptune being the ruler of that Chiron. Her babysitter was a position of authority. It was also a female who sexually molested her. And so she's really utilized all of this trauma, seeing Pluto, you know, Uranus conjunction in the 4th house. Also part of this whole T-square equation is with her moon being in Aries. And the 11th is she's really utilized it to liberate from her and to figure out what her own voice, what does she, besides just her beauty, you know, how does she want to utilize this? How can she speak out about these things? How can she create an inner balance within? And this is really what her soul's desire to do, and she's utilized it through her creative expression. And I mean, Lilith in the 5th house is all of co-creation of some sort, and she's definitely doing that with the masses, you know, especially in regards to her activism. At being in Libra, this is someone who's wanting to return to her center regarding, this is like a double signature, Libra and the 11th house, 5th house axis, giving, sharing, and inclusion. So you want to think that I'm dumb? I'm going to show you. I'm going to utilize the power of my beauty, and I'm going to do it for a good cause. And so this is also her sloughing off, you know, codependency that has been conditioned from prior dynamics, you know, even how she grew up, and really instead of feeling victimized by the whole caricature thing, she's really used it to empower herself and for creative expression. So I could go on and on. I'm going to stop here.
No, I completely agree with you. And it's interesting. You talk about creative expression. She has Jupiter in Leo squaring the nodal axis. And we know that in EA, that's a skip step signature. So she's recovering something in this lifetime. And if you said earlier, power is her beauty, Scorpio 6th house, I would go as far as to say from past lifetimes coming into this lifetime, power is her body. She knows how powerful the female body is, especially if it's been repressed in patriarchal societies. Her natal Pluto, sorry, the south node of Pluto for her is in her natal 8th house. So, we're not going to go into her past life stories, etc., but there has been elements of repression, control, powerlessness to do with her sexuality, in terms of there's an inner knowing of what the natural sexuality is, and that's your Mars conjunct Lilith in the 5th house in Libra. And with her Jupiter squaring the nodes, what she is recovering in this lifetime is that self-expression, and is her creative self-expression. And that actually, her Jupiter rules her 7th house of relationships. So it's like those relationships in her life were going to throw her back onto herself for her to recover her voice, to recover her ability to, like, the documentary that was released on Netflix, she describes through that, and I've got it, I wrote it down. She loved to write when she was younger. That was the way she creatively expressed herself, her writing, her diaries. And she's kept all her diaries to the point that she even said there's a book in her, and I'm sure there will be a book in her one day. Yes. And the stuff she wrote, it was very emotional. And, in the documentary, you see somebody reading it out. And it's just stuff like, let me just find it here. It's, when she spoke about the reason why she went and did Playboy, her first ever shoot, she said that when the camera went snap, that's when she went to herself. Now I can be my authentic self. And she said it was the first time I felt like I'd broken free of something. So there's like an inner knowing she's been repressed on some level, some deep level. And there was a need to break through that. She said, I was shy at first, but by the end of the week, you had to stop me from running out the door naked. There is your natural goddess embracing a natural sense of womanhood. And she said that it felt like it was kind of a gateway to another world. So this is how we spoke at the beginning, what evolutionary state is she at? Really feel she's stepping up, and she knows she's stepping up because she's like, something's not right. The repression, sharing, caring, inclusion is the way forward in a lot of levels. And the one bit I found quite funny, and I had to laugh about watching it, is when she said, if I kept my shoes on, I didn't feel naked. So it's like she needed a little bit of her own control. She wasn't just going to be fully naked. She had to have a little bit of control in the terms of what she was going to show the world. And it's the word she uses, I'm a survivor. And I really do feel in this lifetime she has resolved that skip step. The resolution node is that 11th house north node in Taurus, the ruler being that Venus in Leo. It's like those crises that she's experienced in her life have thrown her back onto herself. She's found her voice, like you've all mentioned, and she's still, to this day, it's her birthday today. She'll be hitting her 2nd Saturn return in the next few years. I really feel there's more to come from Pamela Anderson, and which it could end up being a total different Pamela Anderson the world thinks they knew, just the glamour model, just, nothing, barbed wire. I remember she got a lot of like abuse taken out of the reasons she did barbed wire and why did she do it. But she had the guts to do that movie. Like something that a lot of people would have been like, well, no, the opportunity came and she embraced it, but she's not let it hold her back. Even in the documentary, she laughs a lot of it off, that humor, and I think that's what she needs in order to evolve forwards. But yeah,
I think too, Rob, with her Jupiter square her nodal axis with that north node, and Mercury's retrograde there, so she's been learning about her emotional dynamics for a very long time. And also with Jupiter there, through that, she's learned about her personal truths. And through understanding, which is a Jupiter dynamic, through understanding her personal truths, she's been able to creatively actualize, and using that North Node in the 11th house in Taurus, that's created her natural resources that have stemmed from other lifetimes of her understanding and doing this learning process of her inner dynamics with herself. And I do think that I found it really interesting too with Mercury trine Neptune. You talked a little bit about how she always wrote, even whenever she was younger. And I mean, her documentary is literally like pulling from all the archives. But she said that it would take her into another world. You know, the words would create a different reality for her. And for me, I definitely think that that's Mercury trining Neptune, you know, just taking her in other realms of a way to. It also helped her get to the bottom of the dynamics of where she felt shame, 6th house, Neptune, where she felt her idealistic expectations had created situations for her that perpetuated this. It's also about her wanting to understand how she could utilize this as a way to be of service later on. So there's a lot of relive, redo, and it does speak to the sexuality piece a lot. I just didn't really want to get into that because so much of that documentary, her essence really comes out, and you can see that she's had a lot of traumatic experiences, not only in this lifetime, but prior lifetimes. Dealing with that. I do think that it's really cool that her Mercury is conjunct her North Node of Pluto and Saturn. So her having a voice in this lifetime and using her own natural resources in tandem with her Jupiter and resolving that North Node is really helping her. Instead of straddling that individuated consensus line, it's helping her catapult into this individuated. I know who I am. I know who I am, you know?
Well, it's interesting, just a final point before we move on to the progressions. Her Mercury retrograde, you know, any Mercury retrograde points to the Jupiter function, right?
Absolutely.
So that Jupiter is heightened again in her chart, and her natal Jupiter is actually conjunct the North Node of Neptune. So her spirit, her soul knows where spiritually she wanted to go in this lifetime, and she's kind of been hearing the messages, if that's the right way to put it.
I definitely think, and seeing as like that resolution, that Jupiter, Venus, North Node kind of conversation going on there is, and Mercury retrograde, like you said, she's listening to her inner voice. It's like whenever she left her relationship with Tommy Lee, she knew, she made a choice right then and there. That's also that Mercury squaring, that T-square between Mars, Lilith. Lilith also conjunct Mars is, for a lack of better term, that's a badass woman. Like, that is just a badass. That is someone who has courage.
We will speak about that. That's one of the charts that we're going to look at. So I want to bring Sue into this when we bring in the progressions now. And the first one is discovery. When Pamela Anderson was discovered. And I would like Sue to start us off on this one.
Okay. Well, first of all, Pamela Anderson actually received press coverage right after her birth, having been born as a centennial baby in Canada, because she was born on July 1st, which is the date of Canada's official founding in 1867. So then her progressed sun entered Leo August 2nd, 1989. And from Wikipedia, in 1989, Anderson attended a Canadian football game and was projected onto the Jumbotron wearing the Labatt's t-shirt. And that led to her being flown to LA for a photo shoot and appeared on the cover of Playboy magazine, October 1989. And then she, after that, she moved to LA to further pursue a modeling career. And Playboy subsequently chose her as Playmate of the Month for their February 1990 issue, in which she appeared in the centerfold as the centerfold model. And then she, as you said, Rob, she's appeared on more covers than any other model, and also was the last model to pose nude in Playboy in the January-February 2016 issue, which was her 15th. She also made numerous appearances in the publication's newsstand specials, and also wrote the foreword in the coffee table book, Playboy's Greatest Covers. And all of this is spanning 27 years. And interestingly, her progressed nodes switched to Aries and Libra on October 8th, 2016, and her progressed sun into Virgo on November 15th, 2020, months before she moved back to Canada. So in this chart, let's see if I can do something with the, I don't know if I can, why am I not? Well, okay, there we go. My little annotation. Okay, so here we have her progressed sun moved into Leo, and began her, her 30 years of shining. Here on this day, the transiting North Node was conjunct her moon, her progressed moon, which is opposite to her natal Venus. And with the transiting moon and south node conjunct as well down here. Conjunct natal asteroid Karma is also in the picture with Venus. And the Leo, let's see, yeah, the Leo transiting moon, south node, Mercury and Mars in the 4th house are all trine her Aries moon, which is right here. I know there's a lot on here. It's hard to see everything.
But you can see the transits in the 4th house, like the transits happening at that time.
Yeah. As she made her new home in LA.
Also, Pluto, transiting Pluto conjunct her natal Vesta. There's a lot here. This goes back to, this was like the ground zero of reclaiming her own inner sexuality, by understanding that her beauty was her power, and to utilize this in a way that was revolutionary for her, if we're speaking of her Pluto-Uranus dynamics as well. So, and it goes back to kind of just everything that you stated. I found it really cute of her whenever she said that they pulled her down from the football game. She said, when I looked up, it looked like everyone was just little eraser heads. Like, and it speaks to this kind of expansion process. It's her Neptune, Mercury, of just kind of being in awe and wonderment. And you can see this was a girl who came from a small town who now just got catapulted, right? She was gonna be an icon of some sort. Look at her Venus opposing the North Node that's transiting, that was happening, and also the progressed moon, and that's ruled by her Uranus. So, and her Venus ruled by her sun. And transiting sun was on top of her Jupiter.
Yep. Yeah, she definitely I mean, to me, it's so exact that the sun went into Leo and she just started shining.
Yeah.
I've also got transit in Chiron. Transit in Chiron, I don't know if you mentioned that, was on her progressed Mercury in the second house at 12 degrees Cancer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that one there.
Mm-hmm.
To her progressed Mercury. The kind of like that healing in terms of her self-worth, inner values.
Since it's the
coming
ruler
up
of
to
her
the
Pluto
forefront.
and her Uranus, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And Prime transiting Pluto. Yeah.
And I actually put her nodal return was taking place, as we can see. Well, I say it was progressed, wasn't it? It was progressed. Sorry. She had a
Rob,
that was
her
progressed.
Chiron is trine the transiting that Chiron is trine transiting Pluto sitting on top of her Vesta, by the way. I wanted to point that out for you because it's totally part of that piece you were talking about.
Second house, sixth house, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The body as well. Second house being Taurus, the body. Sixth house being working the body.
And
the body
her
doing the work.
self-worth. She's healing her
Actually,
self-worth and self-esteem.
The body doing the work, the soul work.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Letting her body speak.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Voicing its truth. Yeah.
Okay.
Which here's the thing is, I don't think that she realized how attractive that she was to people. And that's something that comes with the Virgo archetype or sixth house is there's a natural humility. And if you really like understand her and you look at her through her documentary, you can see that there's a natural humility. It is not the way that media portrays her.
Yeah.
She is extremely naturally humble about everything. I mean, even she makes jokes about even like what people have said about her too, which is a lot of her Jupiter. Like she was in the car with her kids and she was like, the only hoe here is me and mom. You know, she was just trying to kind of compensate for also how people treat her, but also there is a natural humility in that, even if it's a little bit distorted, you know? So
yeah, she's just a regular person that got kind of catapulted into the spotlight.
Yeah, literally as a blue zone girl. Yeah, literally at a football game.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't wake up that morning. She didn't wake up that morning thinking, I'm going to be famous by the end of today.
No, she didn't even want to go to the football game. Football games were not her thing. And she was there with her friends and they were just like, wear this shirt. And she was like, okay, I'll wear the shirt. And then they put her up on the Jumbotron and like you said, catapult into stardom hunt. They even brought her down to do, what was it? It wasn't a coin flip. It was a draw, you know?
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. She had pulled a name or pulled something. Yeah. The other thing, asteroid Karma, the moon was, the transiting moon was conjunct asteroid Karma in this, you know, when her sun went into Leo. I just think it was, obviously it was meant to be. And, you know, just.
I also think that even you pointing that out, a thought came to me, and then everything else we've been talking about and her Pluto being in Virgo, just Pluto transiting her sixth house, and it Scorpio is, this is someone who had their survival affected in many lifetimes. And Chiron transiting that second house and how it's affected their self-esteem, their self-worth, their ability to emotionally validate themselves. And this is kind of like a karmic for, because at and I feel like this is really was doing very Virgo type of work, you know, being of service to the whole in some way in a prior lifetime. I mean, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on that. Me just looking at this chart, it seems like kind of like a karmic windfall, especially looking at her Jupiter and the sun being on that, you know?
Yeah, one thought, just as a potential in terms of the natal chart, South Node in the 5th, Scorpio, North Node and Taurus in the 11th, referring back to natal Pluto and then Venus and Leo in the 4th, and seeing specifically the Leo transits here, Sun on Jupiter, and seeing looks like this North Node on Moon in Aquarius. It's like that theme of when given the spotlight, when you're not seeking it, but it comes to you on its own accord. What do you do with it then? Where do you then direct the energy that's been directed to you? And so what that may have brought out is a totally radical or different way of using the spotlight, or using that as a way to bloom, as Sue was sharing, that it was a time of really coming into our own in terms of perhaps coming into a deeper awareness or discretion about how she felt best about using all this. And that creating an inner security, or instead of perhaps a bit of deflection or holding herself back or so on, emotionally allowing herself to grow into that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Seeing the polarity point in the 10th and saying that I'm 10th house, I can put myself in the driver's cart of how I use all this. Where perhaps in the past she may have felt powerless, or a sense of, how do I drive the car?
Yeah.
What do I do when the spotlight's given to me? And she really blossomed through that type of knowledge that came from that. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. You're way better at articulating. Get a feeling about something, and then I just handed you the reins, girl.
I was just thinking the same thing. I love how you guys can put the EA words. I mean, because I get the feeling, I can spot the transits and the progressions, and I get the download of this is important. But then to hear you guys put the words to it, it actually gives me chills when I hear you guys, when you hit on something that just strikes a chord. I love it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to her next progression, just quickly, I've just noticed it now. The transiting Saturn retrograde at 8 degrees Capricorn is directly opposing her natal sun in Cancer in 8 degrees first house. It would have been interesting to see when that Saturn went retrograde. Back, I've just literally noticed that now. It would have been fascinating to see if it was a transit that went over, opposing her sun, and if she had an opportunity to maybe attend a game earlier, or if that Saturn retrograde just happened quite at that particular period. That would have been interesting in terms of how fate may have intervened, Saturn
Do you
being
want me
about
to look it
karma.
up?
It'd be interesting if I'm just curious, just because of what we've just been talking about, because I really do feel this lifetime she's had a lot of I want to use the word support, but in a good way. Like she's needed it to help her forwards.
Yeah, this is someone who I think has like pure intentions,
Yeah.
And so that's why things come into fruition for her, because her
Yeah.
intention behind it is coming from a place. And it's a good example at no matter what stage of evolution that you're at, whenever you have that intention, no matter how people project you out to be, if your intention's pure, like you're gonna get the resources that you need to help you evolve in the way that your soul is seeking. And I think that she's a very good example of that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
I pulled up my ephemeris, but I have the wrong one, so I can't find it. Sorry.
I have mine and I look, but as a point, that this is not the time, the day that she actually, that this actually happened when she was in the Labatt's t-shirt.
Okay, yeah. Oh, right.
This is because I was madly looking it up, and Saturn did go back further into 7 degrees, but this was when the sun went into progressed into Leo.
Well, Sue, if you ever meet Pamela Anderson, if anybody ever meets Pamela Anderson, ask her what happened on the 2nd of August 1989 at that time, because that will be interesting to see how that aspect plays out.
Right, yeah, that's very true.
And she'll have it documented because the girl keeps everything. Also, just to point out, I know we keep going back to her natal chart, but Mercury, Cancer in the 2nd house, someone who hoards their journals. Like, I'm sorry, like that's it right there,
Yes,
he has every one of them. That I
like,
mean, that's
it's
amazing.
literally from childhood, like a way to express her emotions. That is Mercury retrograde in Cancer in the 2nd house, and thank God for it.
Conjunct the North Node of Saturn.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
spanning her lifetime.
Yeah.
Trust me, there's that book, that material will be turned into a book. She'll do it one day.
Probably now that her son has moved and everything else has moved into Virgo. Okay, so shall we move on to the
to her marriage to Tommy Lee.
Okay, so she married Tommy Lee on February 9th, 1995, after knowing him for only 4 days. They experienced a miscarriage in June, and she also suffered a burst ovarian cyst that year while filming both Baywatch and Barbed Wire at the same time. Her first son, Brandon, was born a year later in June 1996, and Dylan was born in December of 1997. During their tumultuous marriage, Lee was sentenced to 6 months in the Los Angeles County Jail for spousal abuse after assaulting her in 1998. And as Rob said, and they divorced that year. I loved in the Netflix special where the Pamela, A Love Story, where when she was debating whether to meet up with Tommy Lee in Mexico days before she married him, she said, "What could go wrong?" So here is the snapshot when her moon has progressed to oppose progressed Mars, echoing her natal moon Mars opposition. So let's see.
She's also, if you look at her natal Juno, Juno being the commitment asteroid, at 28 degrees Leo in her 4th house, that's actually squaring the transiting Juno retrograde at 27 degrees Sagittarius, which is moving through her 7th house of relationship.
So transiting Juno, yes.
Transiting Juno to her natal Juno, which is at 28 degrees Leo, right? I'm looking at the asteroid, right? Yeah.
She's also having a nodal opposition. So
right.
This is definitely a repeat in order to resolve.
Yeah.
An exact nodal opposition.
In the 5th house. So it's definitely having to deal with her kids and also her self-worth, a lot of it. And also, I always feel like Scorpio's like Libra on crack. So you're dealing with, really intense relational dynamics sometimes. That's also interesting because, with Scorpio, there's that repulsion and attraction. And she was initially in a way repulsed by him, not like in a, ooh, you're gross, but in a, I don't know if I should do this, what could go wrong? And I definitely feel like that's part of this nodal opposition. Something inside of her is like, I think I know what's about to happen and I really don't want to go here. But also she said that he was her biggest love of her life, and it's a karmic relationship.
Yeah. This, to me, this whole lineup here, her Mars had progressed to exactly conjoin the South Node. Her, she was having this exact nodal opposition. Her progressed moon had progressed, to the North Node. It was just, how perfectly can this line up?
Yeah, and speaking to what Rob talked about with Juno and the transiting Juno being ruled by her Jupiter, that's also in Leo, this was an opportunity for her to apply her natural truths of what she had been learning from her prior life experiences into her relational dynamics as a way to create balance and sovereignty.
Yeah, and to recover her skip step.
And I didn't even mention this. Her progressed sun is in a T-square to it. To all of this business and
it is, yes. But that progressed sun is also conjunct the natal Ceres.
Yes, that was what I was going to say next. But as I was doing it, I realized that it was in that T-square. But yes, the Sun and Ceres are involved in that in that T-square. And Ceres often represents grief over losing a child. And she made a comment in the Netflix documentary about not being able to grieve losing her baby.
Yeah, she went straight back to work, didn't she?
I don't think she didn't take any time off. She was in the middle of, I think what they said was she was promoting barbed wire and filming Baywatch, and so the other thing is this transiting Mars conjunct progressed Venus. And transiting Chiron conjunct her Uranus in the 4th. So transiting Chiron.
And also her progressed moon at 29 degrees Aquarius in the 10th house. You can't get more public than that. Opposing
Chiron
Yeah.
conjunct her, transiting Chiron conjunct her Uranus being ruled by her natal Mercury. This was like an opportunity that when the going got going, she wasn't going to make excuses. She was going to learn from prior dynamics with Mercury being retrograde.
Well, yeah, and to me, it talks about healing family trauma.
Absolutely. Well, and so often whenever you see something dealing with family trauma, especially like 5th house, 11th house dynamics, there can be a separation where the kids didn't get to be around one of the parents, or the parents were separated from their kids. So who knows what happened in a prior life.
Or the child didn't get to be born.
Yes.
I mean, that's what happened in this life.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking about what happened with Tommy Lee going to jail for 6 months, and with the kids, she could have chosen to say, I don't want you to ever be around these kids again. And that's not what she chose.
Right. Yeah, that's
she
true.
Said, I'm going to give you an opportunity to get your stuff together, and I want you in these kids' life. And so I feel like that has a lot to do with this nodal opposition and that Chiron conjunct that Uranus being ruled by that natal Mercury. Deva, what do you see? You're so little bunny D over here.
Oh, well, I mean, from what you guys have said, it's absolutely a transmutation of old relationship patterns and a new cycle in terms of bringing something to a close, or taking a Scorpio stand in terms of course, not accepting the abuse, not making excuses, and purging that part of the relationship for it to grow into something different. So it's that Scorpio energy too, of say, okay, so it won't be the past, it won't be what it was, and I want to give it an opportunity to metamorphosize into what it's meant to be, or into what would feel as ways where the relationship could grow in the most healing ways, or in the ways that allow a healing rather than a recreation, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Not going back. And an interesting thing also, the Pluto polarity point being 18 degrees Pisces would have been conjunct that midheaven, which is 16 degrees progressed midheaven, which is 16 degrees Pisces. So this relationship was banging in the spotlight. The world would have seen the relationship from the beginning to the end, which is exactly what happened with them. In the spotlight. Yeah.
And it was definitely like iconic for sure. I mean, we're still talking about it how many years later. This happened in 95, so
yeah, and from the husband she's had, this is the husband people remember.
Absolutely.
This is the relationship they remember.
And it's also the one that she felt so when I look at this chart and everything that we've talked about, right? Especially like these Virgo scorpionic dynamics that pull in Pisces, it just everything actually, okay? her skip step, you know, there's a sacrifice component to it in a way, because she has even said, like, I think that I've gotten so married so many times because this is the person that I've always been chasing this. He was the great love of my life. But the relive is around her being her own authority and grounding within oneself and whom she knows she is on a sovereign level, and saying, I'm not going to make excuses for this. So, and it's also about her children. So she didn't want to make excuses. And so there was a sacrifice of the hope and the wish of what this relationship could be, especially looking at, you know, Libra being a big part of her chart with her Mars and her Lilith and her Chiron's North Node. This is definitely a relationship that on a lot of levels promoted healing, but also, I mean, sometimes it's, you know, sacrifice has to be made, and you can really want to be with someone, but you know it's not the best thing.
So she said in the documentary, she said to her son, I loved your dad for all the right reasons. I don't think I've ever loved anyone else.
Yeah. And so she just wasn't willing to put up with whatever that behavior was that created the demise of the marriage, because she even said this was a relationship, I feel like, that made her confront her own ideals, right? Because she even talked about in the docuseries, the documentary, the special, how she looked at it like through rose tinted glasses, and she was like, whenever I really look at it, in the past there was this and this, and I'm not going to go into it. If you really want to understand watch the documentary, but it definitely speaks to everything that we're talking about, and it speaks to her, you know, her Pluto and the Pluto polarity point, her just not making excuses for it. And there was a sacrifice. She definitely deeply wanted to be with him, but this was also about her recovering that Jupiter, you know, and her skip step.
Look, something she also said in the sorry, just to finish off that point. She actually said, love is the greatest healer. I choose love. And her love for her children overrode the love that she felt
Fifth
for
house.
family. Yes.
Fifth house.
Sorry, Deva, you were going to say.
Oh no, just from what was shared too, the shifting from, in terms of the relationship, perhaps she being the initiator in terms of her not feeling that, not that she didn't love him as much as she did, or that had changed, but that she didn't feel she needed that relationship anymore.
Absolutely.
And when you don't feel you need it on that level, I mean, it really starts to shift what the relationship is, the foundations, everything, bing, bong, boom. So this must have been really the metamorphosis of that from within herself, to where it's like, no, it's not that I feel any different. It's that I don't feel that I emotionally am dependent in those ways anymore. And Ra of the children perhaps being a catalyst for that, and really perpetuating that, and then that almost creating a Scorpio wall around what could then happen with it and not. Seeing the Taurus Scorpio and seeing that node. So from my vantage point, this could be the transmission point of that, or the relationship never going to be the same ever again because of the emotional shift in a good way. Does that make sense? Or
Absolutely.
Yeah. Should we move on to the final transit, which was when she decided to move back to Canada?
Yeah. So with progressed Mercury, her chart ruler, entering Virgo on April 17th, 2021, as well as progressed Sun and Ceres also recently having gone into Virgo, all in the 4th house, and her moon returning to its natal position with the progressed North Node. Activated by the transiting Sun, she subsequently sold her home in Malibu and moved permanently back to Canada. Transiting Venus is also conjunct her North Node, and her progressed midheaven has come to Saturn and Eris. She'd recently had her Chiron return. The transiting nodes are square the progressed fourth house Venus karma midpoint. And the transiting moon is also applying to her natal sun. And let me just read one little thing and then we can digest this. In March of 2021, her mother told the Vancouver Island News that Pamela was selling her Malibu home and would now live full-time on Vancouver Island. The property was originally owned by her grandmother and has remained in the family since. When she passed, I just let it go for 20 years while I worked and traveled, Anderson told the Wall Street Journal that same week. I have spent the last year renovating, landscaping, creating gardens so that we can live sustainably, she added. Greenhouse, potter's wheel, canning pickles and beets. I'm creating my life here now again, where it all started. And just a little note, Saturn in a chart can refer to ancestors. So let's, okay, so we've got the progressed Mercury series in the sun, all right here. Having gone into Virgo, the progressed moon up here coming to back to her natal moon, and the transiting sun. The transiting sun right here, activating her natal moon, and then transiting Venus conjunct oh yeah, transiting Venus. There's so much squeezed into a little bit of each house here. The transiting Venus conjunct her north node, and then her progressed midheaven right here, having come to her Saturn. And then the transiting nodes here were square her Venus karma right here, Venus progressed Venus karma midpoint, and one more, the transiting moon.
Transiting moon's in the first house.
Conjunct her sun. Okay. Returning home. I mean, and talking about, you know, creating gardens so that she can live they can live sustainably. What do you guys think?
Do you know, for me, the one I rarely look at asteroids, but when I do, it's usually Ceres or Juno, and I feel Juno for her in her transit wise is quite key. It's been quite key. Like even there, 23 degrees Sagittarius, the transit Juno, it's actually squaring her natal Venus in her fourth house. It's like commitment to herself, like her own inner emotional reality. So she's like, now, and she's had the marriages, had the relationships. It's like, it's time to be committed to myself. What is it that works for me? You know, it's like she's going back into her cocoon, not in a limited or restricted way, but like she needs to go back home to find herself again, if that makes sense.
She always said, and I believe she said it on that Netflix special, that anytime something would go awry in her life, she would go back home, and by the time she left, she had it figured out. that definitely speaks to that fourth house component of what's going on.
And her Cancer sun.
Yeah.
But speaking of Juno in the fourth, I have Juno in the fourth, and I can tell you, and it's in Virgo, conjunct my South Node in my fourth. And I can tell you that's something that I have done my whole life. Like, I'm not even going to go into my own dynamics, but I think that it speaks to what you're talking about, Rob.
It's what she said, and I mentioned it earlier, you know, love is the greatest healer. I choose love. And I feel like at this point in her life, she may have gone towards, okay, what is love? Like looking at that whole aspect and gone back within to, like you said, to find herself again. And I feel like this is, at this minute, I feel like she'll move again. Not that she won't go back to Vancouver or she's going to be there forever. She is only 56. You know, it's not like her career's over, or, you know, it's like she's just at that next phase. And I feel the Saturn return's going to bring something else into the forefront.
Yeah. Well, I do think that it's interesting that her progressions are Virgo in the fourth, and she's got a South Node and Jupiter ruled by her. South Node in Sag in her sixth house ruled by her Jupiter. That's part of her skip steps. She's going back to renovate, so very Virgo-like, her house, her childhood home, to fix it. And it's also using more natural principles as a way for the restoration to make it, oh my gosh, the word slipping. What is it?
Sustainable.
Thank you. That's definitely all of that right there. And
yeah, that's interesting because, you know, she did Broadway in 2022, right? She did Roxy, and she played the role of Roxy in 2022.
Yes.
In that documentary, she said that she visualized her younger self with doing the show with her. So it would have been the transits progressed wise wouldn't have changed so much. It's like she's healing her inner child, literally at the same time. And that's that fourth house Pluto, fourth house energies. And she's looking at her emotional reality, and she's really healing from the inside out.
She also said at that time, because this is around that time, like you stated, is that she was getting restless, right? Which I can kind of feel like that's like a Sag thing, right? You know, to feel a little restless. And then she said, and then I manifested this, which was so like speaking to this as well, you know. And she went out and she did she played the role of Roxy, and she did an amazing job. Like, it had amazing critical reviews, so you know, that made my heart happy for her.
Yeah, I definitely saw her in a totally different light after watching that documentary. And then, of course, when I watched these shows, I have to have the chart in front of me to see where does that show up.
That's what I do. I always pull up, when we do these, I always pull up the chart, and I just sit and I watch and I look at it, and I'm like, this, and this.
Yeah,
I love
it. Is me remembering it.
Right.
This documentary, this documentary was a result of, there was I believe a TV show that was based on Pam and Tommy or something. I saw something in the documentary.
It was based on the whole sex tape. They did a story. They did it without her permission. And Tommy, she had reached out to him, was even like, how does this make you feel? And he was like, I just care about you not allowing this to wreck your life like it did in the past. And she said that she wouldn't even watch it. And that's what was upsetting about it, is like, because I even remember I made a point not to watch it because she came out and she said, no one got my permission for this. I don't agree with this. This is my life. It's private. And this was like the most horrible period of my life. And then it was her son. So we're bringing children back into the mix. You know, my son is the one who said that I should do this, because he said people should know who I am, as opposed to like how people have projected me to be. And I think it was beautifully done.
Yeah, he did a great job. They did a great job.
They really did. And take her power back. Her children saying, take your power back.
Absolutely.
So in a way, every time her power's been taken, she's taken it back. It's like it was to propel her forwards, evolutionary wise.
Well, and it all,
Yeah.
it also now that you mention it, it speaks to her Juno in Leo, partnership with her children.
Yeah. Yeah. Juno's
Family.
very strong. Yeah, very strong in her chart. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you all for inviting me to join you. I had fun.
Oh, that was Sue. We love doing the progressions with you. I think it's amazing. I learn a lot more, especially applying progressions into the charts.
Awesome.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
And thanks for going with Pam, because I watched that and I was like, oh my gosh, I really hope they want to do this one. It just, because it made me, like you, Sue, it made me feel very different about her,
Likewise. I didn't have a particular perception of her, but it made me see her in a different light. And to be honest, the soul always comes first whenever I look at the chart anyway. And kind of seeing her doing her soul work, I'm just like, bravo, just keep going.
Yeah, it's definitely someone who's living their fingerprint, which is
her Mercury and Cancer definitely spoke to my Cancer ascendant. I felt it.
Yeah.
I understand her Virgo side, so
that too.
We all resonate in some way. Right, so just moving on before we close today's show, we got the inspirational quote of the month. Thank you, Jordyn, for bringing this one up. Satguru: emotional security is an extremely important aspect for any human being and for any society to flourish. And I hope today's just this talk and the fingerprint discussion and stuff shows you how important understanding our own core emotional nature really is, and how we can utilize that to progress in our own soul journeys moving forwards. And before we close, just to point out a great book that if you've never read it or seen it, The Natural Astrology. I'm sure Sue's going to put a link in the description notes for where you can purchase this. Great book, great chapters about the whole natural zodiac and by some wonderful astrologers. And yes, we have the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. If evolutionary astrology is something you want to just learn for your own soul journey, you want to do some work with this particular paradigm of astrology, there's a link there to come and learn more about it. And before we close today, I do want to mention that there is a Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers conference taking place in October. Sue, I'm sure you're going to put a link on just to show everybody where they can go.
Yep.
It's a conference that's taken place after 4 years. It is online, so anybody can join from anybody in the world, including myself, who's based in London. Both Deva and Jordyn and myself will be doing a presentation at the conference. All the information is on the website, so please do have a look. And we'll join you soon for another discussion on another astrological archetype.
And they can use Pluto, all caps, for 10% off registration. I feel like I need to put that plug in.
Absolutely.
Please do. Yes, I'm sure we'll put all the description in the bio. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.